expanding your understanding of the different ways that people view pornography, the different ways that people view infidelity. You could even look into how people view marriage. How women view marriage is very different about how most men view marriage. But I think talking about all these things can start to give you a new appreciation for what pornography, cheating, infidelity, and even objectification of women does to a society. It's not normal. It should have never been normal, right? The media and companies, advertising companies made it normal because it was profitable. But again, it never should have been normal, right? So gaining this new appreciation for the fact that just because something's being done doesn't mean it should be done. And just because something's normal doesn't mean it should be normal. Just because men are doing something doesn't mean all men should be doing something, right? So gain this new appreciation of, are you going to be a menace to society, or are you going to make this place better? I'm going to explain acting out and why men act out here in a very simple way. And I'm going to record this episode for both for addicts and sexually compulsive men, but also for betrayed partners, because I do think there's a chasm in between the two that really harms the relationship and rebuilding any sort of trust and safety. The chasm, what I'm referring to is, to the compulsive men. For them, it has nothing to do with sexuality, with how attracted or unattracted to their partners they are. It's got nothing to do with their partners at all. This is a very compulsive, deceptive practice that these men are engaging in. But again, to the betrayed partner, it's very personal. It's very personal to them. It was something that they lacked that led you to be doing all these things, right? You chose other women over them. It's extremely hurtful, extremely personal, right? So there's this big chasm between the two. But the way I like to explain acting out is through this threshold explanation, and it helps both parties. It helps the betrayed partner understand why men act out and what good recovery looks like, and it helps addicted men or compulsive men figure out how to protect themselves from relapse and prevent all of this from happening again. So what do I mean by this threshold? Well, what I mean is if men are going to act out sexually, there is a threshold at which if they stay below, then they don't act out, right? Or they stay sober, whatever you want to call it. But if they cross that threshold, then they are at risk of acting out and have the potential to be able to relapse or slip or engage in the behavior again. So let's talk about that threshold. I'm going to explain it in two very simple ways. So there's two things that men need to focus on, and I think you need to focus on both, because I think focusing on one ignores the other, which increases the risk, and then focusing on the other ignores the other factor. So I think you do need to examine both factors. Now, it doesn't mean that both factors are going to affect you, but I would encourage every single guy to examine both. So what are these two factors? I'm going to explain them both in different sections, but they both alter the threshold. So the first one is your needs, or your perception of your needs not being met. And this comes in all sorts of shapes or sizes. So a lot of men who act out, humans are intentional creatures, right? So when we're going to do something that violates our integrity or puts our family or marriage at risk, there's a good reason why we're doing this. Now, obviously, everyone listening to this knows there's not really a good reason, but the point is there's a perceived reason to do it. And so if your needs are not being met, and again, this comes in all shapes and sizes, I'll explain that in a second, the threshold will be lower. And what I mean by this is when the threshold of acting out becomes lower, there's the brain considers acting out worth it. So that's what we're talking about with the threshold. At a certain point, the threshold gets so low that the brain decides, you know what, it's worth it. It's worth the risk. Okay. So when I mean that your needs are unmet, this could be tons of things. It just depends on the guy and his flavor of compulsivity or addiction. What some examples of this could be, I'm not feeling appreciated or respected. Right. I'm not feeling cared for. I'm not feeling loved. I don't feel like my desires or my emotions matter. I don't feel like you take my aspirations seriously. I don't feel like, I'm starting to feel like I'm not going to get the life I want. It seems like it's all about everybody else, but what about me? Anyways, there's millions upon millions upon millions of these potential beliefs where you start to feel like either A, your current needs are not being met, or you're kind of forecasting out to the future, and there was this life that you wanted, and you're starting to second guess whether that life is actually going to happen for you. And again, there's like I said, this really depends on the guy, his wounds, his trauma, his upbringing, his the geographic location in which he was brought up in. Right, everybody's going to kind of perceive perceive their needs in different ways depending on a lot of life factors. But the point is, if you perceive that your needs are not being met or they're not going to be met, that threshold starts to become lower and lower and lower. Right? Because you start to wonder, hey, well, what about me? When am I going to get my turn? When am I going to get my life? When am I going to feel cared for? When am I going to experience my pleasure? Right? So as that drops, I would say it increases the risk of slips, relapses, and infidelity, because that threshold is becoming lower and lower and lower. And again, as it becomes lower, the brain starts to consider these, riskier behaviors or unwanted behaviors as worth it. Right. And I'll kind of talk about more of this on the second component that you guys need to look at. But I hope you guys understand that. Right. So basically, the more and more and more you feel like things that you want in your life are not happening, that threshold is going to be lower. Now, one word of warning, a lot of guys are unaware of their needs being unmet. A lot of guys don't really feel unseen or unheard or uncared for, because again, there's a lot of this stuff in masculinity that we're supposed to be needless and wantless. And so rather than really focusing on our needs, isn't that funny, right? It's a paradox right here. It's like guys are supposed to be needless and wantless, but the irony is, in our efforts to be needless and wantless and be these selfless supporters and providers, we end up having a ton of our unmet needs, which then again, it lowers that threshold. And that's why I think it's naive to think that you're just going to be this ruthless, needless, wantless provider for your family. You're a human just like everybody in your family, and you're not exempt from the same needs that everybody in your family has. Okay, so that's one factor that would decrease or lower that threshold of where your brain would consider acting out worth it. Now, the second piece is perceived threat. So, and this isn't talked about as much, right? Factor one's talked about quite a bit, right? Guys getting more in tune with their emotions, guys getting more in tune with their wants, their needs, their desires, really just starting to feel their body, right? That's pretty well talked about in the field. The second aspect isn't talked about as much, and that's, do the men consider this not, I'm trying to think of a better way to say this, but do they really think it's a big deal? And I think that lowers their threshold. I almost wonder sometimes if that lowers the threshold even more than a perception of unmet needs. What I'm referring to this is, is porn that bad? Hey, there's all these billboards of women in bikinis and with their cleavage, and it's widely understood that the female figure is something that men want to look at, right? There's strip clubs, there's adult shops, right? Now all these things kind of give us the perception that it's normal, right? There's movies and clips all over to this day of men going to strip clubs or hiring strippers for their bachelor parties, right? And so there's this perception in society that lusting after the female figure is normal, and it's something that men like to do, and that society has more or less accepted it, right? Again, and we can keep seeing this, right? We have escort websites, we have OnlyFans and content exchange websites, right? So there's this just widely accepted, for whatever reason, perception that men want to consume this content and act in these ways. So again, we can't underestimate the effect of our society, more or less, not really doing anything to get rid of this, because men start to. I don't think they realize, but their moral compass starts to become altered by how many people are engaging in this. Again, even having cheerleaders at football games, right? Or just at sporting events. Again, the concept that they're not dressed like they used to, right? The cheerleaders back in the day, their dresses were quite long and they did not have their cleavage. And now, I don't know if you guys have seen, but it's definitely changed. There's lots of cleavage, and they used to wear these shorts basically under their skirts. Well, they're not doing that anymore, and so there's definitely a lot more to look at. And the point of all this is we see society becoming more and more sexualized. There's sexual jokes. It's hard to turn on and watch a TV show without seeing an affair. So the point is, this effect starts to decrease the perceived threat. So again, that lowers the threshold. We don't necessarily see these things as bad. We see them as normal, but we say, oh, well, I don't want to do them because of, again, my religious beliefs or my marital contract. But again, religious beliefs and marital contract, that's very, very different than, well, my perception is that all guys are doing this, and And is it really that big of a deal? So again, that lowers the threshold. It makes the perceived threat to your life lower, and again increases the likelihood that you would do it. And again, one more factor that I want to add to that, and something that I see a lot in my group, because a lot of my programs for a lot of high achieving entrepreneurial men, there's a culture amongst successful males of women lusting after you as a measure of your success. So again, you'll see for more successful men, or men striving to be successful, they will become pretty quickly aware that that is one of the measurements of success. How many women lust after you? How many women want you? Right? We see this in The Wolf of Wall Street and all sorts of movies where men in positions of authority, leadership, power, wealth are being lusted after, and they basically have their pick of the women. And many times they're being unfaithful. Their wife knows about them being unfaithful, and they continue to be unfaithful and don't experience consequences. Again, all of these perceptions that we see through the media, for advertising, film, it spreads this perception that maybe the threat isn't as bad as everyone's saying it is. And again, what's the problem with that? It lowers the threshold. We then don't feel like we're necessarily doing anything that abnormal. So just to recap, in terms of why men act out and how to prevent it, we need to elevate that threshold. Right? We need to elevate it. So, and again, the two things that threaten it are you allowing the world and society to basically brainwash you into believing that females are objects to look at, right? And again, women are guilty of this too, right? They in many ways treat themselves like objects, right? They're shopping, putting on a bunch of makeup, getting plastic surgery, right? So in many ways, women are participating in this whole objectification. But again, it doesn't mean that it's okay. It doesn't mean that it's what we should be doing. And it certainly will contribute to lowering that threshold of, oh, well, this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to find these people attractive, and they want me to look at them. Other guys are looking at them. And again, lowers the threshold. And then let's go back to the first one, your needs. Are you happy? Are you fulfilled? Right? Are you settling unnecessarily? A lot of successful men do this, right? They have the story of, well, I need to be a provider. My family has high expectations. We like to go on nice vacations. We like to drive nice cars. We like to be members of this country club and that club. And, so they feel this pressure to achieve a certain level of success financially. And again, they ignore their needs. Right. Or they're trying to climb the ladder at work because they've been told that the purpose of life, of succeeding in life, is to, gain the highest position within the company, whatever it is. But again, as we're doing that, we're ignoring our wants, our needs, our desires, really how we feel as a human. And we're basically surrendering that to capitalistic structures or corporate structures. And again, it gives you this perception that, man, this is a lot of work. When am I going to get my needs met? Who's going to pat me on the back? Are they going to tell me that I did a good job? And a lot of times for successful men, it's funny. The more successful we become, the less appreciation and accolades we get. It's kind of an interesting thing, which that's not great, because usually at those higher level positions, that's when men are working harder and trying harder. And so to get less appreciation, less admiration, and less compliments, it can be hard for us because we're working harder than ever before. And again, what's the result of all of this? It's lowering that threshold, right? You're starting to become more, almost subconsciously, more of this selfish thinking starts to leak into your mind, and you start thinking about me, my life, my pleasure, my goals, my aspirations, my appreciation, you as you're not getting your needs met, more and more of your brain is becoming more narcissistic, for lack of a better word, or grandiose or self-absorbed, right? And that's normal. Like I said, that's not pathological. It's a result of you ignoring your wants and your needs and your aspirations and forcing yourself to live up to some sort of measure of success as wherever you learn to measure that, right? So the result being lowering your threshold, right? Filling your mind with more selfish thinking. And on the other side, right, not considering a lot of these behaviors abnormal, even though they are extremely abnormal and they're hurtful and they're in violation of your integrity and your marital contract. So it should not be normal, and it isn't normal. And the irony is it's shown online as if it is. Right. So we just have to be careful seeing these conflicting messages. So what do we do about all of this? Right. So before we end this episode, let's talk about what is, because the goal would be to elevate that threshold as high as you can. Right. So let's talk about recovery work for both sides. So let's go back to your unmet needs. What's recovery in that work? Get with a bunch of guys who you respect and admire, your peers, And you guys should be, this should be a massive part of your recovery, right? I mean, how much is there to really talk about sex and pornography? I mean, you can only talk about it for so much. I mean, really what we need to start talking about is how are we going to elevate this threshold so that we're not acting out? Because again, that's a big question. A lot of guys act like, hey, if we know all other guys are attracted to women, of course, why are they staying in their integrity, but we are not? Why are we acting out and doing all of this to our wives when these other guys don't? And that's because their threshold's much higher, right? So you need to get with your recovery group and you guys need to talk about all of the potential flaws about being, again, for high achieving men. You need to find other high achieving men and talk about how all the stories were told about becoming 1% better every day and having no room for sadness and no room for complaining and no room for anxiety, right? All these emotions slow us down, and it's all about progress and moving up and to the right at really at all cost, right? And again, they've kind of softened that language now, but prior to 2010, it was a lot. Hustle culture was very much talked about and very much celebrated, and still is to this day. But so the point is, you need to talk about the flaws in our worldview, the flaws in our way of living, right? How are we becoming needless and wantless, or basically what story were you sold where ignoring your needs, your wants, and how you feel was what you were supposed to do? And again, for most men, they don't even know they're doing this. They're just so focused on success and progress that they're under this perception that they're crushing it, right? That they're living a great life. But what they don't realize, because we live in a capitalist society, is that they're going all in on capitalism, but they forgot about their humanity. And again, we did not build this country to make happy humans. We built this country to provide people opportunity to create capital. Right. We have to remember that, right? And especially in America, right? Most countries, right? The whole structure of the country was to help people generate capital and have laws to protect and facilitate that. It was not, how do we build a country to make people happy? That was not the objective when we put together the government system, the judicial system, all that. So that's how you guys got to get in touch with your needs. You guys have got to look at the insanity of hustle culture, this insanity of 1% better every day. I'm a provider. I mean, listen, you're a human no different than your son, your daughter, your wife, your dad, your grandparents. I mean, we're all humans and we all have needs. You can't just ignore them because you happen to be a male in America. You have just as many needs as everybody, and you need to tend to them. I'm not saying you need to give up on capitalism. Right? I haven't. But at the same time, I am saying capitalism is what it is. But your needs are just as important, if not way more important, especially if you want to live a very fulfilling life and avoid relapse. What kind of things can we do in recovery for this perceived threat? I would say this one's a bit, well, I don't know. This one's, in many ways, it's easier because I think all you really have to do is talk to your peers in recovery, talk to your therapist, talk to your wife, but, really gaining an understanding around, how do other people see this, right? Are other women offended by how much pornography is out there, right? And when they see the statistics of how many men are watching it, does that offend them? What's their thoughts there, right? And then what do young kids? I mean, if you were to have a young conversation with a young kid about pornography, what's their view on it? And I don't mean like super young, but somebody of age where pornography is going to start to be distributed through school or talked about, right? But it's interesting. I think expanding your understanding of the different ways that people view pornography, the different ways that people view infidelity. You could even look into how people view marriage. How women view marriage is very different about how most men view marriage. But I think talking about all these things can start to give you a new appreciation for what pornography, cheating, infidelity, and even objectification of women does to a society. It's not normal. It should have never been normal, right? The media and companies, advertising companies made it normal because it was profitable. But again, it never should have been normal, right? So gaining this new appreciation for the fact that just because something's being done doesn't mean it should be done. And just because something's normal doesn't mean it should be normal. Just because men are doing something doesn't mean all men should be doing something, right? So gain this new appreciation of, are you going to be a menace to society, or are you going to make this place better? Right. And again, that's elevating the threshold, right? Elevating the value of integrity and the value of legacy and the value of not being a destructive person to the human race. that should matter. That's going to elevate the threshold. So as a result, if you're talking with your peers about how it's cool and normal to have needs and to voice those, to have emotions and to voice those, to want something from your wife and express it, right? And then say, hey, let's go to therapy and see how, but basically acknowledging that there are needs, desires, wants, motives, aspiration, goals, and really talking about those things and not ignoring them, right? And then also on the other flip side, you're really trying to challenge this whole over-sexualized world that we live in and asking yourself, what do I believe? Like the world believes that, sure, but what do I believe? And what do I feel like's right? What kind of world do I want my kids to grow up in? And it's probably not one that's hypersexual, right? And if that's the case, you need to stop participating, right? If you want it to change, you need to stop contributing to the adult entertainment industry. If you're contributing, it's going to be there when our kids are there. I can assure you that, right? So the result, my point of this episode was to give you a kind of a different look at acting out. Right. When that threshold is becoming lower and lower and lower, the likelihood of acting out is much higher. So if we can engage in recovery practices to elevate that, right? Treat ourselves like humans, treat other people like humans, really rewire our brain and how it sees sexuality, what's okay and what isn't, what's best for the human race and what's not. And are you participating in any of the things that it's harming this place and making it worse for the future generations? All of these things need to be considered so that you can start elevating that threshold, seeing the consequences for what they truly are, seeing the damage for what it truly is, and seeing yourself as a person, a human being with needs, right? So that you don't get to this point where you start wondering, what about me, right? And having that narcissistic thinking kind of come back in. All of these things need to be addressed in recovery to elevate that threshold. In the end, I don't even like calling this whole thing recovery. To me, elevating that threshold is just becoming a healthy human being, right? Weak, damaged humans who are not treating themselves nicely and paying attention to their existence and honoring their own humanity, that threshold is so low. And those are the type of people we see who constantly violate their integrity repetitively. Right. So it's being a healthy human being and starting to engage in these practices where you're thinking bigger and you're really honoring your own humanity and honoring the humans around you. That's how we elevate that threshold. And if you're not doing that in your recovery groups, you're missing out on what I would consider one of the most important pieces of long-term recovery.